Welcome to the hobby desk. Today I'm going to show you how I paint my blood letters. Now the method I'm using involves an airbrush. Of course you can use a regular old hairy brush. It takes a little bit longer, and if you're like me you probably have about 90 blood letters anyway, so an airbrush is a lot quicker. But here goes. So first, assemble your lovely blood letters. Now I usually find my blood letters, most troublesome places are the top of the head here, where the large banana-like section sticks to the back of the main face. There's usually a gap there. So plastic glue is always recommended with plastic anyway, but you may find you have a little bit of a gap there, and also a little bit of a gap on his chubby little buns. So I've used a little bit of liquid green stuff. If the gap's a bit bigger than that, I would recommend regular green stuff. But yeah, hopefully with a bit of plastic glue, squeezing the model together, it should eliminate most of the gap anyway. Next thing is remove all the mold lines and prime your miniature. So for this, I'm actually using a good old cheapy rattle can from a local pound shop. And you don't have to go heavy with it, just dust the model as long as it's an even coverage, smooth as you can for a rattle can. There's a joke there somewhere. Try to get as smooth as possible, obviously weather dependent because you don't really want to do it indoors. So a well ventilated area and nice and smooth is if possible. The airbrush will be smooth anyway, but with a rattle can you might find if it's too hot a day the paint might semi-dry in mid-air and you might have a bit of a grainy texture on the models. You can prime it with a brush if you want, but if you're ever painting models in bulk in a big batch, and today I'm only using a batch of 10, but still it is quicker with a can, and see what you can do. So let's get a smooth coverage and then come back once it's all dry and ready for actual paint. Okay, so once that's all dry, you don't have to prime. Priming with resin is always best, for example, or metal, because it really does protect it, stop from chipping. These are plastic models, they don't chip as bad, but it's always nice having a primer on it, so it really seals this in and reduces the chipping in a way. Okay, so now it's nice and smooth and black. You can always go over it again after the dusting of a primer with a nice airbrush black, make it nice and smooth, because if you keep adding layers with a regular brush, it'll get thicker and thicker, and we want to keep the layers down to keep the detail, don't we? So I have just gone over it quickly with an airbrush black, and I remember to wear a glove for once. Woo! So I don't actually have black hands, look like I have some kind of disease in my hand. I have possibly other diseases, but we will go there. You could always zenithal highlight just on the top of this model to make it pop a bit more. I like the good old GW corn red, so it's quite a nice dark red, and it does get lighter on top. So I will start with a good old gory red. So that's a nice kind of corn red, and then I'm going to go with a little bit of this on the top. So I don't want to make the model too silly bright, but if you did want to make it pop a little bit, you can always zenithal a bit of white just on the top to make the top part of the model a little bit brighter. I could do that now if you like. So clear the airbrush out, make sure it's nice and free, because darker models on the table may look more realistic, but if you go for a little bit of zenithal, make the top part the brightest, then it will pop a bit more. I mean, I do find it's less realistic, but hey ho. It's all about being eye-catchy across the table, really, isn't it, at this stage? So I've got a little bit of white in my bowl. So any white will do, your favourite white, whatever it may be. And I'm just going to go on top of the model, just on the crown of the model, on the shoulders of the model, slightly on the back of the model, just like that. all I'm going to do. So I'm just catching his buns just very, very slightly, the backs of his legs, basically the top of the model. I'm holding it by the sword because that's going to be the last thing I'm going to paint. So once again, crown of the model, top of the arms, biceps, hitting the bit of the back, and it just captures his buns. Top of the model. And I'm trying to do it mostly from above because these guys are quite hunched over. Normally I do it a bit of a 45-degree angle, a bit like this. When you get around to the front, you'll find that it's kind of catching bits that shouldn't really catch on this particular model because they are really hunched over, as you can see. Maybe 45 degrees angle on the back. When it comes to the front, just do it straight down because he really is hunched over, and you'll be accidentally getting his chest. That's not really what you want on this particular model. He must have terrible posture, hunched over like that, just like a miniature painter. Right, I'm going to do it with a lot. And it's not much. It's not like you're going to have to go over the white again to really make it pop too much. Because it is their natural skin tone is the red. It's not like it's a light source, like plasma glowing or anything like that. They're not luminescent. But I suppose you could always paint them like that. This is just the classic method of painting bloodletters. So, red. But bloodletters look great in dirty white. I've seen that before. I've seen them painted up in very, 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 very dark reds, nearly blacks, and they look amazing that way as well. So once that's dry, then we'll start with the gory red. Okay, so I have my gory red now, and I'm going to lay this over the model and keep it nice and thin. Don't want to drown it too much, so one coat will probably be enough, because I'm going to have mine quite dark. You might want to add 2 coats to yours. Just get a nice even coverage. Remember to get all those difficult bits first if you're using an airbrush. Underneath the head. Underneath the back of the head is probably the worst bit. As you can see already, it's quite a nice red. So get them in the armpits, like it's using some deodorant. You can see now, it's quite a nice red. I mean, you could always leave it to that, maybe dry brush the back. Now this is going to be a quick method of painting these guys, because I'm not going to paint them up each individually, Golden Demon standard. I want them all to be the same, and I'm going to end up painting 90 of them. So I'm not going to spend hours on each one. Like some models, you might spend, let's say, 8 hours on it. You wouldn't do that with 90 models. Me personally, anyway, because I want these to be tabletop ready. So I could always leave it to that stage and dry brush it there, but I will just hit the tops of the muscles with a bit of brighter red as well, because I want these guys to be pretty dark. Because after I paint the horns, I'm going to be painting the sword and a flaming effect, which will be on the next video. So I'll carry on covering each of these guys nice and evenly. So yes, I'm painting 10 on this video. I've got another 80 to do. So this is why airbrushes were invented, in my opinion. Yes, wicked effects, but so much time saving. Get some in your armpits. Back of the head. Remember, nice even coats, nice and smooth. I do tend to not go all the way to the feet, because I like the feet to be quite dark. Because it kind of blends in. Kind of like bone later on, when we do the bone on the horns and stuff, you'll find that the tip of the horn is actually a lot darker. And we'll do the same with the feet I'm going to blend it down. So the bottoms of the legs are a bit of a darker skin. But that's just my personal preference. And it's the same with these demons. I like to paint them quite dark. You might want to paint them to the really ultra bright red. Right, I will rinse and repeat with the rest of them. So, 3 down. So far. Okay. And like I said, you could always leave it like this now and dry brush it. Because once it's dry, there is quite a lot of contrast between the dark part of the lower legs and the brightness at the top. Because I suppose you've got the pre-shading of the zenithal underneath. But I am going to make it pop just slightly and use a little bit of bloody red. This isn't going to be everywhere. This is just going to be on the back of the head, maybe the backs of the arms. So I've got a little bit in my bowl, just checking it off camera on a bit of paper, which is always a good tip. Now, I don't shake this badly normally. I am holding the tip of the sword and that's why it's wobbling pretty bad. So don't worry, there's nothing wrong with me. So I'm just going to go to the back of the head like that. You just about notice it. Backs of the hands. But obviously not doing it underneath, because I want the underneath to be quite dark still. So I'm literally just doing it at the back, just blending it in slightly. Backs of the hands. Just like so. And you can push this as far as you want. You could always do the top of the shoulders. Maybe the biceps. But later on, you'll be dry brushing the what looks like barnacles, but I'm assuming it's pimples or something. Maybe it's best for me to hold it from the base now, not the tip of the sword, so it doesn't look like I'm shaking quite as bad. Right, so just there, and there. And it's really personal preference how dark you want it. I want it fairly, I don't want to use the term grimdark, but when I first saw these guys, well, the older bloodletters, the old metal bloodletters, back in the first lot of white dwarfs I used to pick up as a kid, they were incredibly bright red, and I thought at the time, that's a bit cartoony, you know. I do find the darker you've got it in the shades, in the recesses, the more grim dark it looks. I don't really want to use that term, but they look more menacing that way. Let's put it that way. Than bright red, like clowns. So you can see now that little bit of red really does, I think, make a difference. So I'll do it with a lot of them. Like I said, I'm just doing it on the backs of the heads. So the face is dark underneath, it's getting lighter, and a brighter red once it gets to the back. And just a little bit on the tops of the shoulders. You can always do the centre of the back as well. But yeah, just add as much as you want. This is a very, very fast guide. Because with horde armies, I personally don't want to spend hours on each one. So this is basically the colours done. The main colour of the skin done. And so once it's all dry, I will literally dry brush the barnacle-y bits, and that's the skin done. And then we'll get on with the horns and the bone. Well, the talons, I guess? Claws, that's a better word. We'll go with that. Right, okay, that's a good time to stop it, now the compressor's kicked in. Okay, so for the next stage and the final stage of the skin, I like to use a little bit of this, or any orange really that's quite bright. It's leaning towards almost the white end of the orange. So get a little bit on your palette with a dry brush. So whatever brush you like to use for a dry brush. I use quite an old brush. Just get the excess off a bit of tissue. And just test it in the back of your hand. Get a painter's thumb. And just bring it up on the barnacly bits, on the spotty bits. And this is why we do this bit first, before we even attempt to do the black. Because if you do the black on the spines, or on the talons, then you might get a little bit on there as well. So, rubbing along on the back. So it's really just picking up the detail, like so. So making those spotty bits pop a bit more. You can paint them individually, that's fine. But like I said, this is a technique if you want to paint 90 in one go. So I'll do that now. I'll just pick up the detail there. As you can see, I have got a little bit on the horn, but I haven't painted the horn yet, so that's not a problem. So I'm just going to get a little bit on there, just to catch those spotty bits, like so. And that's all I'm doing. A little bit on the face. I'm just catching it. Now, if you think that's too bright and you don't like that and it doesn't really fit your scheme, you can always try this, which is quite an orangey red. Wild Rider Red. So it's not quite red, it's not quite orange. Once again, get a little bit on your brush, wipe off the excess, and you want the driest brush but still leaving some red behind. So about that. So I'll pick another one and I'll show you the difference. So I'll just drag on his back there, on his back there, on the shoulders, just getting those spots again, picking up some detail on his legs there. So that's the difference between, you can see a little bit on his leg there and the leg there. There's not a great deal in it. So if you think the orange is probably a bit too garish, try that. And all it is literally picking up the spots. And from a distance, really doesn't look much different. There we go. So I'll do that on all the models. Whatever colour is your preference, but I do like quite a reddish orange, just so you can pick it up from like the other side of the table. So from there you can still see that. Oops, knocking it everywhere. So from there you can still see that there is some spotty detail. Okay, now we'll do it on the rest of the models. Next, once you're happy with the dry brushing, and like I said, you can go as hard as you want with the dry brushing, really push it. You can go ultra bright orange, make them really pop. But for me, I just wanted a hint, because I want them to be pretty dark. So get your favourite black. So I'm using a Baden Black, because it's quite smooth, but I do find often with a Baden Black you will have to have two coats to cover anything. So just use your tile or your wet palette, whatever you're using. Get your brush to a fine point. And now we start covering the horns. So these bits here. and we want to get the nails as well, so get those little bits in there. And we also want to get the toenails as well, these talons. So this, I find, is probably the most time consuming bit, and it's not that bad really, but it is the worst bit out of the whole of the model. By the time you've finished all the horns and the talons on one lot, so you do, I don't know, 10 at a time for example, you go back to the first one and maybe put a second coat on that as well. So I find I like this painted black as well. So the spine piece, this bit here, get a bit more water on my brush because my paint's a bit dry. And yeah, get a nice even coverage. Once you've finished your 10th one, for example, you might want to go back and start again with the first one. So those are the pieces you need to cover: the horns, the spine, the fingernails, and the talons as well. Alright, I will get cracking with those then. So what I like to do with the blacks is, when I first put the black, especially with Abaddon black, on the spines and the horns, you'll find once it's dry it looks slightly opaque. So I put a second coat about 3/4 of the way down. So I don't go all the way to the, let's say the face for example there, with the black, and then once it's dry I go about 3/4 of the way down. So it'll be a stronger black. So it kind of blends in. For later on, for when I add the washes. So for the tongue, I like a nice rich purple, which later on, once it's dry, I will highlight. So I've applied that now while I'm waiting for the black to dry, and then I'll get on with the metallics. So the metallics of the blade, I like to have quite an aged look to it. So quite a dark silver. So I'm using this from GW. That's for the handle itself, and then on the trinkets on the handle, on the end, and for the hilt itself, I'll use a bit of this. So I imagine it's quite an ancient metal, so I wouldn't have gone with a gold. I think a gold's too bright, and if you do use a gold, maybe put an agrax or something on it. But this is the kind of colour I'm aiming for. I can always highlight it up if I'm not happy with it. So once again, add a bit to your palette. Get a nice point on your brush, and this is the bit I'm meaning, this bit here, and you'll find on the end we'll probably have a corn symbol or something on the end that will need painting up as well, so that's what I'll do. I'll put 2 coats of the silver on that piece, 2 coats of like the aged looking bronze, or whatever you imagine you want this part of the sword to look like. Now, I could always paint the blade black, but what I'm going to do is another video on how I paint lava swords, magma swords, fire swords, something of that effect. So I'll leave that for now, but feel free to paint it any colour you want. Some people make it look like fire, so they start off with white and bring in some yellows to it. Some people might put a cracked texture paint on it, for example, things like that, but that's not the way I'm going to go. And I have seen black blades before edge highlighted up with a bit of turquoise possibly, or like a Thunderhawk blue, which is always nice on a black. So I'll do the metallics in a minute, and then I'll leave the rest of the sword for another video. I want to show you how I do magma swords, lava swords, which could be used for a power sword or maybe a fantasy sword, something like that. Okay. So while you're waiting for your metallics to dry, now's a good time to do the white eyes and white teeth. Now normally I do a bit of a bony colour, but I do find with this it really makes the face pop and stand out. So get your favourite white. I'm using a bit of white Scum. And the reason I'm doing this now is if you do make a mistake and you want to define the teeth a bit more, you could always drop a bit of null oil between the teeth, make them stand out a bit more. And that will be the same paint we're using for the steel for the handle. So rather than getting a paint out, putting it away, getting it out, putting it away, do each colour once. So I'm going to get a very fine brush. So I'm using a 00 for this one here, and you get as little paint on it as possible. Not enough to make it a dry brush, but enough to just pick up the details of the teeth. Just like this. I'm just using the side of the brush, like so. With the eye, just be very, very careful, just to hit the centre. I'll put a bit more paint on the brush there. Getting a bit closer, so you can see what I'm talking about, if the camera can adjust. So you can see, if I get out my own shadow, I'm picking up just the teeth there, just the edges in the centre of the eye. So around the eye should be still the dark red we had with the airbrush. But if you do need to drop a black wash in there to make the eye pop a bit more, you can do. Yeah, just picking up the details there of the teeth and getting the centre of the eye. So this is the steady hand section of the model. So rinse and repeat on the rest of the unit. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the teeth, so I probably won't put any null oil in there or around the eye sockets. But what I will do is get a bit on my brush and apply some fairly heavily onto the steel, because it has got quite a lot of definition on that handle. I'll get a bit into the palm of his hand there as well. And I also find, because I didn't go all the way down with the black for the horns, I will put a little bit at the base, so you should be a little bit of a transition between horn and skin. So there's one. A bit more null oil. So on the steel part of the sword there. If you can get in there as well, fantastic. So just a little bit in the hand, and a little bit around where the horns meet the head, just like so. Just adds a little bit towards the transition of the black there. Okay, so I'll carry on doing that for the rest of those. And when the wash is drying, I like to add a little bit of this Thunderhawk blue as a dry brush. So get your old brush again, or a proper dry brush. Let's get as much paint off as possible. And this stage is mainly for the horns. So just the edges of the horns, the highest point, and a little bit on the spines as well. So you'll notice the spines have got quite a bit of detail on, so I'll just drag it across there. And that's all you need. And you don't have to add this stage, but it is just a little bit of detail. Remember, every stage on these guys is another several minutes per model. If you're doing 90 of them, you want to limit the number of stages. So I'm only just giving it a slight hint there. Probably can't see a lot of that on the camera. So yeah, when painting mass hordes of armies, it's all about technique. So it's not necessarily painted badly, but trying to cut a few corners. So what you are painting well. Things like dry brush at this stage is definitely your friend. Because if you had to blend that yourself, wet blend it, fine on a character, painting 90 of these guys will really add up. So I'll carry on, do the whole unit. Okay, so there you have it. There's your unit of bloodletters. What you want to do next is paint the bases like the rest of your Khorne demon army. So I recommend, if you are doing extremely fast, let's say 90 models like I am, try a little bit of technical paint like this, so give it a nice cracked earth finish. Or if it's more of a concrete-y, rough ground, this is always a nice paint as well, both from Citadel. And paint the rim of your base to match the rest as well. So I generally paint the rim of my base is black. So it matches all of my armies, and I believe that black frames the model, but that's just personal preference. The only thing left to do on the actual model itself is the blade. So you want to decide how you want to paint the blade, be it just a regular silver, and just make it nice and quick, maybe put a wash on it, or spend some time on it and really make it the centerpiece. Or nice bright, like almost like a power sword kind of colour, pick a nice garish colour like a green or a blue or a turquoise, really stand out. But for me, the next stage is I'm going to paint a magma sword. And this is going to be a little bit eye-catching, and I'm going to do this on a separate video so you guys can see how I paint those kind of weapons. Thank you very much for watching, guys. So you can see that there is a little bit of detail there. That's the exact noise they make. So they're not masses of detail, but they are quite quick. So I have painted these 10 in a matter of hours. Of course, the basing's to go and the sword is to go next. So you could easily knock out 10 of these guys in a day. So if you're painting 90, it's really not so bad. So this is purely a quick method of doing it. If you want to spend a bit more time, you want to blend, you want to build up the muscle definition, that's totally fine. But this is a quick method on how I paint my bloodletters. I'll put up pictures when they are completely done on our House of Chaos community page over on Facebook. Please join us over there. Put up any pictures of any models or terrain, anything you're painting up at the moment, even a sketch of terrain. Always fascinated with that kind of stuff. And anything from 40k, AOS, Star Wars Legion, you name it. If it's a miniature, we want to see it. Even if it's a story or a bit of fluff on a model, it's all hobby related. Thank you guys, and hobby safe.